Brian would have talked more about the journalistic side of things. I'm going to talk more about WikiLeaks as a radical project of transparency, even though I don't like the word transparency, because, you know, it's often everything but that. But for want of a better word, I'll use that. So just a little bit about my background. I'm a criminologist at Ulster University, but I'm also, you can tell, originally from Australia, so I'm a compatriot of Julian Assange, and I've been working for 20 years on investigating state crime and corporate crime, and so I'm well versed with the nature of both state and corporate secrecy. I actually began my kind of career investigating war crimes that were perpetrated by the Australian government in league with the mining giant Rio Tinto on a place called Bougainville, which is a part of Papua New Guinea. And then since then, I've gone to work around corporate fraud and also grand corruption, focusing on regions around Central Asia and Eastern Europe, but looking at how they work through and function through the enabling classes in places like the UK and Switzerland. And so a lot of my career has been about finding ways to investigate the secrets of the powerful and finding out all the barriers that you experience when you're trying to do this kind of work. And of course, I've also got the scars that come with trying to do this kind of work. So everything you can imagine. I mean, Julian Assange has definitely wins the award for having suffered the most for the craft, in having, short of some other journalists who've been blown up. But, you know, I'm used to getting things like death threats, legal threats for the kind of work that we do. Now, today, I wanted to talk, you know, I think that there are people who are much more knowledgeable and a lot more eloquent in talking about Julian Assange and his case and the injustices that have been perpetrated upon him by various governments, including the Australian. And so I didn't really feel qualified to do justice to that line of conversation, as important as it is. And so I thought another way of honouring Julian Assange and WikiLeaks' work is to actually talk about the project that WikiLeaks was about, what it was trying to do. And so today I'm going to really talk more about this challenge that WikiLeaks was at the forefront of, which is, you know, again, apologies for the terminology, but radical transparency. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So, and I think that, you know, it's an interesting question because, you know, this desire to uncover the secrets of the state and corporate elite isn't sort of unique to the left, and I think we're seeing that today. There's a sort of a range of different political perspectives on why we should investigate the powerful. So you kind of have everything from the right wing, the far right, who are out there to expose the globalists and their conspiracies, their pedophile rings and whatnot, and their links to the devil. I think in the case of President Obama, you have obviously the more liberal, mainstream, the centrist part of politics, which again you see an ambition amongst some sectors of that political population to, again, it's about exposing the secrets of the powerful, but in order to remedy abuses of power and to enact accountability. And then you have, of course, the sort of the left and the socialist left. And of course, they wouldn't which is a tradition I'm part of. And the aim in this respect is not so much to look to liberal institutions to bring accountability to the crimes that have been perpetrated, but to expose secrets in order to understand better how class systems work, because so much of the class system today is concealed. And so being able to investigate and document both the secrets of the corporate and ultra high net worth individual class and also states is important to understanding how late capitalism works and functions. And in order so we can conceptualize it, theorize it, and better then able to organize around it. And it's also about, trying to expose these hidden corners where the elite organise and collaborate in order to raise class consciousness so that we can develop social movements that are better able to challenge the asymmetries of power that are currently sort of organising the global political economy. And I think for me, it's quite an interesting sort of WikiLeaks as a project, because I come from a sort of Marxist tradition of scholarship. And I think within Marxism, we always see reality as elusive. I think that that was the whole idea behind Das Kapital, was that capitalism as a system of social relations, you can't simply stare at the world and see how it works. It doesn't necessarily reveal itself empirically from the standpoint of observation. You need to use the social power of thought in order to begin to understand the relations that are a central part of structuring capitalism, to understand the properties of those relations, and to understand the social trajectories that those relations give rise to. So I think that, and certainly for the most part of the 20th century, and 19th and 20th century, I should say, Marxism was very much about seeing the epistemic challenge of understanding capitalism, that it doesn't reveal itself in the sort of overt ways that other modes of production may have revealed their exploitative qualities. It requires a process of theoretical inquiry to disclose through concepts its reality that is often hidden. And so a lot of the challenge of the 20th century was unpacking the sort of hidden dimensions of capitalism as a global system, and then being able to disclose it and being able to conceptualize it, and then to be able to mainstream those concepts so that labouring people across the world are able to see with greater clarity the system that they're a part of and that is responsible for the lifestyles and the systems of life that they are experiencing. And I think, but in the last sort of 30 years, we've begun to see that not only is capitalism elusive because it is difficult to grasp, it requires a lot of careful theorization. It's also elusive because a lot of how it's organised is hidden from us. And this, I think, is something that for the radical community is an emergent challenge. So much of how our everyday life, and I think it's been brought home probably quite vividly with the energy crisis, where our life is organised ultimately by I'm using it sort of, again, forgive me for the terminology, everyone has a different ways of communicating this, but ultra high net worth individuals, the billionaire class, who work in family offices. I go and say to my students, what's a family office? They look back at you and go, I don't know. Is it like an office you have in your house? You go, no, that's how most of the bourgeoisie organise their interests today, through family offices. These are clandestine organisations that organise the financial affairs of the billionaire class. They often work very closely with hedge funds and other kinds of financial institutions, and they're completely off the grid. We don't see how they work. We don't know how they work, and the only information that is communicated through a highly complex discourse that usually only wonks can unpack, and usually those wonks are other highly paid financial sector people who have no desire to expose what's going on. So you have the contemporary capitalist class organising its interests through these kind of obscure organisations whose activity we don't get to get much of a vision into. You also, of course, have the inherent lack of lack of transparency with the corporate form, which was set up. The corporation and most today's corporations are set up as vast assemblages across a whole range of different jurisdictions to conceal how they operate. So if you go and look at most multinational corporations today, they're smattered across Jersey, Cyprus, Singapore, Hong Kong, London, Scotland, wherever. They all have these wide-ranging corporate forms that are designed to conceal. And then, of course, you have, that's the world of capital. And then, of course, the state, which is responsible, which is overseeing the reproduction of the sort of capitalist market economy on different scales, is itself secret, or a vast part of what it does is secret through mechanisms of classification. So much of how the contemporary order is organised today is either completely secret or is disseminated publicly in forms that are very hard to decode. And so I think, one of the challenges for progressive social movements is to realise that now we not only have an epistemic challenge, that classical challenge of how do we make sense of the system today, the capitalist system, and how it works and functions, reproduces itself, its laws of motion, its tendencies, and what that all means. We also have a challenge that we need to be able to, a lot of the information that we need to assess where the system is going, how it functions, is either not disclosed or is not disclosed in a format that is easy to interpret and decode. And so I think that's where we come to projects like WikiLeaks and what it was about, which is bringing these dark corners into not only into light, but bring them to light in a way that allows us to decode the information and make sense of the information. Because governments love transparency, and they'll markets say they're transparent, and they'll belt out terabytes of data, but most people won't be able to decode what that data means or what it says about the system. And so I think and you won't be able to see this, I don't think. I'll try and put this up. So the challenge we really have in this kind of project that WikiLeaks kicked off, that's going to be only if you've got your eyesight fully intact and at a high level of strength will you be able to see this, which I don't. The challenge we face today in trying to continue with the work of WikiLeaks is the information ecosystem, which I've very, very crudely tried to model here. And that is, we have, if we're trying to make sense of these dark corners that are so essential to the future trajectory of our world, well, we face a couple of impediments. A lot of the data is simply secret. It's secret either because it's kept secret by states or because the capital has the right to keep the information secret, or and because it's commercial in confidence, it's private data. So that's one challenge. We also know that a lot of data is released in formats. So if you go and look at financial market data, if you go and look at corporate filings, corporate disclosures, most people, everyday people, will not be able to make sense of that. It's written and coded in a language that is designed to be dense, and only people with specific expertise really can decode it. And as I said before, those people often aren't very much aligned to radical movements of progressive change. So a huge amount of data that is available on markets and governments is what I call grey data. It's available, but it requires you need special machinery to be able to scrape all the data and then model it, or you need special skills to be able to read and decode the information. And that requires resources. And then, of course, there's data that is visible, and I say visible in the sense that it's people can see and understand it, because this is visible, but you can't really understand it unless you have special tools and resources available to you. And then there's visible data, and I think WikiLeaks was trying to do that though with its Cablegate, and so they were trying to make the information not only pepper it out there to the public, but to curate it in a format where everyday people could access it and use it to try and understand processes. And so therefore it was about a process trying to make it visible. Now, in trying to continue the work, that kind of work, well, how do we get this information, and how do we make it available to social movements? And I should say, I don't see this as like a top-down social movements. Social movements are critical to getting this information. But one of the yep.
You can show that slide in larger format. No, you could. Great.
I could play from the current slide, but it seemed to make it smaller, if that may.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Oh, but hang on. It could be because hang on. I think I might know the reason why. Sorry, bear me 1 second. I'll do that again. And then I think it's the way it's projecting on the screen. If I do that, well, that's better. So I'll explain it just because I know it's probably still hard to see. So I'm not going to expect you to rely on that. I'm not going to do that to you. It's just actually more helpful for me as a device to kind of explain. So you have kind of secret data, that's that. And how do you access that? Well, unfortunately, you've got state secrecy and private secrecy that prevents you from accessing a lot of information that is really important to understanding how wealth is managed, which is our social wealth, just happens to be in private hands due to the system we're in, and also how governments are conducting themselves. Well, you have how do you get that information? Well, you need leakers, either some people to leak the information, and we're currently seeing, and of course, as we know, when people in government, in the military, in the security services leak information, they are subject to criminal prosecution. But not only people who work in government are subject to criminal prosecution. If you work in a Swiss bank and you know that your bank is helping to launder money for all sorts of nefarious individuals, helping people evade taxes, if you reveal that information publicly, you can be prosecuted. So criminal prosecution laws apply not only to state officials, but there are also different individuals who work in powerful institutions who can also be prosecuted criminally if they leak information to the public. And also on top of that, there's a case actually recently in Australia where a popular YouTuber who does a lot of really interesting investigative work for young people, Friendly Geordies, he was prosecuted privately by the gambling lobby because he was revealing information about how they were laundering money and involved in dirty politics. So you can also have private prosecutions as well. And then, of course, outside of being prosecuted, most people who work in family offices, hedge funds, corporations, banks, all sign non-disclosure agreements, all have contracts of employment. And if they reveal or leak information and it's uncovered who they are, they can basically have their life ruined. And in addition to losing their job, they'll never be able to work in the industry again, and they will be sued. And there are some really important leakers in the financial industry who suffered that very fate because of what they did. So you need leakers, or on the other hand, you also have hackers. And that's another reality when you're doing this kind of work. I've had some really fascinating leaks sent to me on an email from an anonymous email address with a huge cache of documents. And you have no idea whether that's come from, where it's come from, if it's a leaker who's using from an organisation who's just hiding behind an anonymity for their own preservation. You don't know if it's the CIA, you don't know if it's the FSB, you don't know who it might be. It could be a security service or it could be a private hacker. But hackers are another part of the information ecosystem. For me, if the information's accurate, and it comes from an honest source and I can verify it, I'll take it, even if it did come from the CIA or the FSB. You know, as long as it's accurate and it hasn't been doctored, and you obviously have to do a lot of work to verify that, that's important. Then the question is, okay, who's going to get this information and who's going to make it public? Well, in this kind of ecosystem, you have obviously there's investigative journalists. They're one spoke. You have investigative academics. I think there's about 8 of us in the world probably doing this kind of work. Oh, it's probably a lot more. I'm being unkind, but as you know, academics don't tend to be the most. I'll actually stop there before I incriminate myself and alienate myself from my profession. You've got NGOs and unions who are also investigating, and you've got activists who are investigating the both. The illicit activities, secrets kept by corporations and by states, particularly when it pertains to quite sensitive, controversial subjects. But then, in order for them to be able to do this work, generally it requires a lot of time, a lot of resources. So, for me, an investigation, major investigation, may take 2 years. That's the normal thing. That's me when I'm not teaching. All I'm doing is this investigation. It's time-consuming, it's complex, and the only way I could do that is obviously to be able to access a revenue source. Now, who are funding these people? Well, you've got capital, private capital, media, and obviously they're not really interested that much anymore in funding this kind of work because it's not profitable. Capital wants to make profit. Investigative journalism, it's time-consuming, it's dangerous, it's risky, you can be sued. So it's not, capital's not exactly keen to do this. You can get grants. If you're an academic, you can get grants from research bodies or charitable foundations. Unions can fund this. You have individual donors. I mean, WikiLeaks was very much looking to try and build its own independent funding base, and it all can be self-funded. And I mean, it's even interesting within that grants body, which is where a lot of those investigative journalist consortiums, academics, whoever doing this work, they're relying on grants, and that creates its own kind of quasi-capitalist ecosystem, because what then happens is, like you say, your ICIJ, which is the one who had the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers. Now they've got to fund themselves. They want to sustain themselves. They want to grow themselves. Do they do what WikiLeaks did and make all that information that they have? And they have incredible amounts of information. I've only been able to see it courtesy of some. I won't even say how I've been able to see it because I'm not supposed to be able to see it, because they protect it. The ICIJ have terabytes and terabytes of information about the powerful and the political class and the economic class, and very vivid information, a lot more than what actually you would have seen in the media. But they only share it with select media partners because they live in a system where they have to reproduce themselves. And the only way they can reproduce themselves is if they have proprietary knowledge that no one else has. And they can then go to grant bodies and say, hey, we're the ones who have the Panama Papers, we're the ones who have these papers, and they can get funding. So it creates its own, you have your own kind of competitive ecosystem, which doesn't really lead to sharing of information. It actually leads bodies to conceal information because it's in their interest to keep the information to themselves, to monopolize the information, and to ensure that they then are able to be the ones to get the next big multi-million-dollar grants that can sustain their organizations. And then, of course, you've got the risk that, so you've got barriers there, and then you've got the risk that once you do have this information and you have spent your 2 years investigating, you're now ready to go public and expose what's going on. Well, what happens then? Well, you've got the risk that you can be prosecuted. As I said, Assange is being prosecuted, and that's created the very realm, the very open possibility that others will now be subjected to the same treatment. As I mentioned before, It's not just, you don't have to just worry about the United States government prosecuting you. You now also potentially have to worry about private bodies being able to prosecute you for private prosecutions. The much more, you know, I think that the risk of prosecution is something that's usually one that's a more real possibility is if you're Assange working at that scale where you're putting at risk a major powers, their secrets there, but also, or if you're working in a very dangerous place, a Russian journalist, or where I work in Central Asia, an Uzbek journalist, you face real risks of prosecution. For us working in Ireland or the UK, it's what's known as SLAPS, strategic litigation against public participation. That's the real risk we face, and that is whenever we get major leaks of information about a financial institution, a bank, and a powerful political player, they can send us legal letters threatening to take us to court. And there's a whole range of reasons they can take you to court. They can take you to court for libel. They can take you to court for breaches of privacy. There's a whole range, and so straight away, when you get these leads, so whenever I have to publish something, it'll be the same for any journalist, any academic that impinges on the interests. I have to straight away find £8,000 about to get a lawyer, because they need to read everything I'm about to publish, and I need to get their approval, because if I don't get their approval, the insurer for the university won't stump up the cash if I get sued. So you need to have about $8,000 in your piggy bank at a minimum. If it's a complex investigation, it might require more, because in my last investigation I did, you know, it was actually to do with Russian individuals working through UK institutions. I got 4 serious threats of legal action. And that was just a month or two ago. And that is commonplace. That is common. I mean, I've had colleagues and friends who spent years in court, and you don't have to have a credible case to go to court. You can just you can just take people to court, ruin their lives, and it's the same thing that it's a private version of what happens to Assange. It's there to send a chilling effect. You make an example of Assange, other people will not follow in his footsteps. Well, the same thing. You look at a journalist who spent 3 years of their life in court, or you see an academic or an activist who spent 3 years in life of their court fighting a spurious libel case, and you go, do I really want to take this risk? You see your little kids playing in front of you, you see your very precarious mortgage, and do you think, do I really want to be doing this? So you have that risk as well. And then, of course, and I am tying this up now for discussion. Then if you do, once you do, you've got your leakers who are prepared to risk their life or their freedom or their security. You've got some interesting data from corporate filings or other information you can get. You finally, you finally got your big stockpile of information on some scandalous secret that's been hidden. Then it's how do you get it out and who do you get it to? That's not easy. And the simple fact is that you can come there with red hot information. You can go, and I have many a times gone to the Guardian, the BBC, anything like that, and they're not interested. They're not interested. And other times I think I've had something that's not that interesting and they've been biting my hand off. And that's true. I think a lot of journalists can speak to that, and a lot of it's very difficult to get information out there. And then the question is also, when the information is released, how is it packaged? How is it shared? How is it interpreted? I think that that's again a question to do with the perspective of those who are writing the stories and presenting the information. You can present something in, for that liberal paradigm. Oh, this abuse of power has happened, and now we need to correct it. Or you can have people who get this information and say, well, what does this tell us about the nature of neoliberal financialized capitalism and where it's taking us? So, the tradition people come from, the concepts they use, shape how that information is presented. They then have to find a medium, and it is very hard to find a medium. I mean, I can give you, film is a great way of communicating information. I have some wonderful friends and colleagues who've made documentary films that are and I'm very critical of tell them if their stuff is crap when it's good. And they've done great stuff. They've won awards at all the film festivals around the world. Can they get their things shown anywhere than at like 2 in the morning on a channel you've never heard of? No. They can't get it because it's, again, the whole ecosystem here is controlled by capital and you have to be able to appeal to it. It's very difficult. So then of course you have to then, how do you get it out to the public? What format do you get it to the public, and how's that information conceptualized? And then how ready is the public to use that information? You know, I think that's the other challenge with WikiLeaks was they can expose, but if people are not, their social movement is not ready to enact and respond, then that information just becomes an incredible story for one day, and then it's soon forgotten. So the importance of information is only relative to the spokes and conduits within the wider public, within the social movements that can respond. You know, and so you know, there's a really important thing here that you know, the social movements and how we organise within community groups, within political parties, within unions, you know, that and how we can galvanise people to not only make them help people interpret this information, but also to act on it is important. And having vibrant social movements is also important to putting the pressure to get this information out, you know, to creating an environment where leakers feel motivated to do something and to leak information because they feel something will happen. So social movement, even though I put it right down the bottom here, is critical to this whole ecosystem. So I think, you know, just to conclude, I'll say that, you know, you know, WikiLeaks is addressing a really critical problem. A lot of how our current world is operated is done through veils of direct or indirect secrecy. It is very difficult to challenge that, but we need to be able to challenge that if we are to galvanise a movement that can take us from the current existential trajectory of the world, and we need you know, we don't just need more WikiLeaks. We need social movements that can galvanise people to use this knowledge in ways that can enact change. And it's funny, I want to say the very last thing I'll say is I want to say, you know, one of the defenders of Assange, John Pilger, who's another compatriot. And it's funny, whenever I talk to journalists about John Pilger, they can tell in the sound of my voice that I kind of like him. So they know not to, but they say, well, you know, but he does sometimes, you know, twist facts and, you know, he did this and that. And I go, oh yeah. But, you know, it's interesting. Growing up in the 1980s and 1990s in Australia, you grew up and I had no way of understanding the political reality I was in. You know, I didn't like homophobia. I know I didn't like racism, but I couldn't, I just had that kind of Orwellian mute protest in my bones that something was terribly sick in the Australian political mainstream. And then one day I walked into a secondhand bookstore in about 1994, I was 14, and I found this copy of a book called A Secret Country by John Pilger. You know, I never read anything like this in class before, and I got it, and it was an investigation into a whole range of outrageous injustices perpetrated by the Australian government, with a thick part of it against Indigenous Australians who have suffered so immensely and continue today. And, you know, and I think back to that time, and not so many of us were radicalized by people like Pilger, who brought this information to us. We all knew something was wrong. Young people know things aren't right, but they kind of need access to information that helps them turn that mute protest into action. And so, you know, I think that this project is important for young people today, so they can have that same experience of finding that book that they suddenly says, yes, what you're feeling is not crazy, and here are all the facts, and here is how it works. But I'll shut up there. I just want to say something nice for John Pilger, given he always gets crap.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you very much.